All right, strategic angling fans, thank you for tuning in to episode 5 of Strategic Angling. This is one I think all three of us are particularly excited about. We're here to talk about all things Dobyns rods, how Dobyns rods, works, numbering, the lines that they offer, and then at the end we're going to cover our favorite rods and why. This one's going to be all about Dobyns. All three of us are on the Dobyns, pro staff. So yeah, this is going to be a pretty biased episode, but we all think these are really, really nice rods. So I'm going to kick it over to JJ. He's a very long time Dobyns rod pro staff guy. He got Chuck and I on, and we're going to let him cover the numbering, and then we'll get into the different lines they offer.
Yeah, I've been using Dobyns for better part of 11 years. I really like the company. I really like the rods. I like the fact that it's pretty small, and when you call there, you can sometimes you'll even talk to Gary on the phone, which I think is pretty cool. He's also very active on the Dobyns Rods community Facebook page. If you have questions, you can tag him on there, and he may not get back to you that day, but usually within a week he'll be on there. But I thought we'd start out just talking about them. So when you pick up a Dobyns rod, there's gonna be some numbers on the side, just like every rod will say, whatever rod, say 7 foot, medium, heavy, fast action, or whatever. Dobyns are numbered so that you can call them by the numbers instead of the weight. And the reason that I think that's important is because each rod company, whether you compare Dobyns to a St. Croix or a Falcon, their medium isn't necessarily going to be the same as the medium from another company. So the way the Dobyns are numbered, you're going to have it's going to say DC 736 CFH. That's this rod. So that means Dobyns Champion 736 is 7 foot 3 inches 6 power, and then C is for casting, and then FH is full handle. There's also a split handle. In most models they'll come in both.
Right.
That's pretty much personal preference. But the powers in a casting rod go from 0 up to 6, 6 being the heaviest, 0 being the lightest. It's important to know that if it says flip instead of C, that a 5 power flipping rod is a heavier rod than a 5 power casting rod, and a 5 power spinning rod is also lighter than a 5 power casting rod. So and also crankbait rods, the 705 CB. So basically, whatever line you're looking at, the higher the number at the end, that's the heavier power.
Right.
So
the cranking rods will be a little more parabolic.
Yes.
Than the casting
and
rods.
Not as heavy. A 5 power a 705 crankbait rod is not nearly as heavy or as stiff as a 705 casting rod is. So you want to kind of walk through it. Matt down at K&K can help you. Any one of us can help you.
Yep.
The Dobyns Rods community Facebook page is a good resource. If you're wondering, you can go on there and read other people's questions, ask your own questions. And it's a good community, I think. But it's really not that confusing once you kind of get down to it and you get used to what you're talking about.
So I'll flash on the screen the image of this rod, but the first two letters signify the model.
Yep.
The line, the grouping. We've got the number. You want to read off the different?
Yeah, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 lines. Actually, there's 9.
More than that even.
Because you have the Colts, which is I'm going to go from cheapest to most expensive. So the Colts are around an $80 rod. Then you go up to the Furies. The Colts are orange, have an orange accent. The Furies are the next rod. They're about $120. They usually have a green accent.
And Colts are CL.
Yep.
So that if a rod's a Colt, it will start with a CL.
Yeah.
And then
the next one was
the
Fury.
Furies is FR.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And those are around 120 retail. Most of the lines also have a good variety of rods. You won't be necessarily able to get every model in every line of rods.
Yep. So you got Furies next, and
then you have Sierras, which retail around $160. The Sierras come in a micro guide series for those that are interested. I personally am not, but they also come in a Trout Panfish series. So they offer lighter models for those that are maybe more multi-species or looking to fish for trout like Brady did last weekend. Those are kind of a forest green, not as much of a bright green as the Furies. Next lineup would be the Cadence. That's a relatively new series. They have red accents on them. They're really well received. There was a prototype release of them last year.
Early last year, right?
Yeah, and they sold out real quick, and the demand has been real high. They've been waiting for the supply of the final thing to come in.
With this airing February 12th-ish, he may have his Fury shipping.
Yeah.
So.
Next line you get into is the Champ XP, which I know talking to Gary Dobyns himself, that's his favorite line. I think it's most of our favorite line. It's probably the most rounded line. In other words, it's a good combination of quality components, quality cork, good guides, good reel seat. You're paying a little bit more. They're around $250 retail, but you're getting a good quality rod. It also has the most selection of different models that you can get.
Right.
Pretty much any rod you can get in any line, you can pretty much get that rod in a Champ XP.
Yeah.
The next we kind of step up to the more higher end is the Champion Extreme HP, and really it's overkill for a lot of moving baits. It's great for flipping, pitching, bottom contact type baits, but you don't really need that rod for day to day. If you're throwing a spinner bait or a chatter bait or a swim jig, you don't need to spend $350 on a rod. And then at the urging of many people, Gary introduced a very high-end rod that's called the Ecstasy, and they're around $500 retail. It's got AAA grade cork, very, very good aesthetics, and they're light, very light.
They've actually got 4A grade cork.
4A grade cork. Sorry, yeah, it's good stuff.
And they retail for $550.
One thing that I would say, if you go to pick out a rod in general, whatever rod you're going to go, bring your reel that you're going to put on that rod to the store and put it on there and see how it balances. Because one thing about Dobyns is that they're built for action and they're built for balance. They're not built for weight. They might actually weigh, if you pick up a 736C, it might weigh more than a comparative rod in another company. But the balance of it is what Gary strives to do. I mean, if you talk to him, he moves these guides 1/4 of an inch one way or the other way, adds weight different places so that the rod balances in your hand. And even though it may be heavier in weight, at the end of the day, with it balanced right, you're putting less strain on your wrist and elbows and hands, and it feels lighter.
Yeah, as a guy who went from lower end rods, as Chuck likes to bring up, when they first met me, and then going to Dobyns, I was blown away just by, I thought they were the super, super light rods, and that was, you said, the balance. But
Yeah.
in reality, they're probably no lighter than anybody else.
They're
just
heavier
built-
than a lot of them.
They feel
actually.
lighter because they are balanced.
Right.
You can have the lightest rod in the world, and it might not feel balanced when you put the reel on it.
Right.
And that's important, because if you're unbalanced, your tip position is in a different place, your wrist is strained, and especially if you're throwing a bigger bait, or if you're fishing 5-6 days in a row for a tournament, you're going to wear and tear on your wrist, elbow, shoulder. And I've noticed since I went to him that I noticed less of that aches and pains, just because it feels right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Well,
what kicked that off was, sorry, Chuck, is
No, it's
the
okay.
first two is the numbering or the lettering of the series, which JJ just covered. The next two numbers are the length of the rod. So even if it's a 7-foot rod, you're going to see 70. And then the final number is the
power.
Yes, the third number is the power, like you said, 1 through
Right.
6.
Yeah.
And then the next one there is the type of rod, casting, flipping. Is there spinning on S?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Spinning.
they say spin, or SF is spin finesse.
And then the
Right.
last number is full handle or split handle. So
Right.
that's the naming and numbering system. And now I think Chuck is maybe, or JJ, going to get into some of their favorites from each line.
Yeah.
They will too. They will too list the description afterwards. But like I said, if you say this is heavy, extra fast action, this may not be a heavy in another line of rods. It may be a medium or medium heavy or an extra heavy. So that's why you want to kind of experiment and talk to people and ask questions.
Right. I think his rods are probably the most consistent power ratings there is on the market. They're spot on, I think. You know, the one great thing too about Dobyns is I love cork.
Yeah.
He uses cork. You can get them in split handles. You can get them in the full handles. But I really like how cork feels. And really the difference, we've got 8 or 9 different models. The models just vary difference in components and quality of components. They start at a lower price point, and each rod just changes components, maybe to more expensive guides, more expensive cork. The blanks will be a little bit more expensive, and that's how we get all the way up to the Ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I didn't touch on, there is the Boom Boom series for Fred Rambanis. Those are basically Champion XP rods with different aesthetics. They look different, and they're the rods that Fred himself uses, but the blank and the components are basically Champ. And then the Sobe series is
that's coming out. It's built off the Cadence line.
Okay.
But Sam Sobe, I don't know if you've seen his channel, big YouTuber up Twin City area, Minnesota, and he's been a long time Dobyns guy. And I think his is built off the Cadence.
So what's your favorite rod?
Mine's a no-brainer. Mine is the 734 Champ XP.
Full handle.
I do prefer the full handle. This is a split. This rod to me balances a lot of different reels. I can put a variety of different reels. This one is one of the Tatula SVs, which is a very good reel for casting distance. It comes in 6/4, 7-1, and 8-1. So it comes in various, but for the 734, it's my go-to rod for swim jigs, spinner baits, buzz baits, chatter baits. It's also my go-to rod. It was actually designed for super spooks, so bigger topwaters I use. If I'm throwing a Texas rig swim bait, a lot of times I'll use that in around lighter cover. You can do everything with that rod. It doesn't, for example, throw a square bill as good as a 705, but if you had to use it for a square bill, you can use it for a square bill. It doesn't flip as well as a 736, but if you had to flip with it, you could flip with it. It's just the action of that rod for moving baits in particular is just it just fits me perfect.
Yeah, if you're going to have one rod and only one rod, the 734 is probably the first rod to buy.
Yeah.
Then you can gauge all your fishing applications to that rod and work out from there.
Yeah.
But that is a great starting point to do just about everything to start off with.
And while we prefer it in the Champions, blend, they do offer 734s in all of them. Right?
Every line
Yes.
every line has a 734, which
Yeah.
would be your all-purpose rod.
Yep.
The other thing that I found from using Dobyns is somebody might say, well, I want a 7-foot rod. They want a 704. I would encourage you to try the 734 because the extra 3 inches is adds a lot to the tip and makes you able to cast further. It also holds fish better because it just gives a little bit more play at the tip end. And that's one thing that when I joined Dobyns, I was like, well, I want 7-foot rods. And
Right.
he talked me into going to the 7.3s and longer because he can build that rod to do a little bit, to have a little more tip action, but still have that backbone behind it.
It's easier to control the fish.
Yeah.
So I think we all really, really like the 734. Chuck, do you want to pick another one?
Yeah, and I'm going to stand the Champion XP as well. The great thing about the Champion XPs, it's really the workhorse of all the rod models that he has. They carry every different model, every different flex, length, are all in that Champion XP line. But my favorite rod is the 736. I like a stiff rod. I use it for frogging, throwing small swim baits. I'll throw big spinner baits with it, but I really like throwing braid with this rod. It's a great rod, and it does a lot of stuff that I like to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good, that's, you go back to, if I could have one, it'd be a 734. If I could have two, I'd add the 736, because then you
Yeah.
can add a little better frogging, a little better flipping. You can throw a swim jig also, in heavy pads or cover. I'll throw
Yeah.
a swim jig on a 736 because it'll get them out of there.
The great thing about the 736 too is a lot of really stiff rods, the tips are always really stiff, and you really can't do a lot with them. But his rod, the 736, it's got a little tip on it, so you can throw lighter stuff with it and actually work the bait really well. So it's a great versatile rod for me, and I have quite a few of them that I use. And a rod that we don't have here in this line is probably another one of my favorite rods, is a swim bait series rod. He has a rod, the Champion XP 806 swim bait rod. I love to throw swim baits. I like to throw big swim baits, and it is another great rod. And like we said before, the great thing about the Dobyns rods is I like the 806 Champion, but they also make that 806 swim bait rod in a Fury series. So you can drop down, and the Fury, for the money, is probably one of the best valued rods on the market. For $110 to $120, that rod is really well accepted.
So if you could have one, it's a 734, and if you could have two, it's a 736, and then if I could have three, because why put a limit on this? I would say I use the 705 CB bull handle a ton. And one thing I'll add about full handle, I was using split before I did the full handle cork thing, and I thought that was the way of the world. But when you went to the full handle, when you throw that crankbait a lot, at least on the river, you're really precise target casting, and having a full handle where you don't have to really necessarily care where your left hand ends up is nice, because you can end up anywhere on that handle.
Yeah.
But the 705 CB, getting back on target, great rod. And I don't use the glass version, I just use the standard crankbait version. Has good power, great bend, keeps them pinned, especially fishing square bills and current, which we do a lot. So that's definitely one I use quite a bit and I talk about quite a bit. But
He makes that one, the 705 CB is available in most models. In fact, the Colt 705 CB for $80 is a great crankbait rod. But the other thing in the Champ series is there's three 705 CBs. There's a 705 CB glass MF, which is moderate fast. There's a 705 CB glass, and there's a 705 CB graphite, which is actually a composite. But they basically, if you wanted the breakdown of that, the CB glass medium moderate fast is really parabolic. The glass is just slightly less, and the graphite is even slightly less than that. So if you really like that traditional glass feel, that kind of the old school where that whole rod loads, that's the glass MF, and then you can step up. I prefer the plain CB, the graphite model myself, but
Yeah.
so
That's
if you had to
personal.
pick three rods on the river or in our area, those are probably the three you're using the most.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about his rods is if you really just wanted to pick 3 or 4 rods and run with it, you could pick a 705 CB, a 733, a 734, a 735, a 736, and you can cover almost everything there is if that's the way you want to do it. But the great thing about Dobyns too is he has a ton of different specific models for certain techniques. So if you're like JJ or me, we probably got 30 rods, and it makes it fun. I mean, you can really get technique specific on each of your applications. You don't necessarily have to do that, but I think for me, it's just part of the fun to really try to get that technique down perfect, and you can narrow it down a little bit with picking the right rod.
I know on some of our tougher days, I saw a lot of JJ's rods on the decks.
Yeah, I mean, I think
yeah. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, this is our preference. Everyone's personal preference is going to be a little different. These are kind of generalities that we're given. But, for example, like somebody throwing a jerkbait, a lot of people like the 704 CB for a jerkbait. A lot of people want a heavier rod and use a 705 CB. And a lot of people like a crisper tip on it, and they'll use a 3-power casting rod like a 703 or a 683 because they want a little more responsiveness in the rod. Same thing with topwater rods. You know, a lot of people use the 705 CB. Some people use a 733C or a 734C, and some people even use, you know, like on a whopper plopper or a heavier topwater, use a 735 or 736. I mean, and there's a lot of personal preference into that. You kind of have to figure out what works for you and what you're looking for, and then ask questions, you know, to us or Matt or on the Facebook page. All those are good resources that you can ask. You know, if you can get a hold of us and you want to try one, you know, you can borrow one of mine and go try it.
Yeah, they're very budget friendly. They carry a lot of different, basically cover every budget.
Yeah.
You know, so you don't have to jump right up and spend $250 on a Champion. You can buy a Colt or buy a Fury for $80 to $110.
Yep. So JJ mentioned the Fury 705 as being a good lower end crankbait option. I know we talked a lot about the Champion series, which is what we frequently use a lot.
Yeah.
Chuck or JJ, or I guess I could. Is there a Sierra or a Cadence or a Champ HP or even an Ecstasy that you guys would mention? Or
I like the 733 Sierra. I like it for throwing like a trip worm or a weightless Senko, or even put 30-pound braid and I throw a spook on it. It's a great topwater rod. It's one of my favorite rods too. It really works. It works well for several techniques.
yeah, and I'll add for the Sierra series, I use those mostly for my spinning setups. So I don't use spinning rods maybe as much as I should, so I went a little budget friendly on that. I've got a 702 and a 703 Sierra for spinning, which covers most spinning needs for me. And then like JJ mentioned, these guys came out with this Trout Panfish series, which I'm really excited about. Last weekend I had the chance to use the 620 Sierra Trout and Panfish series, throwing little Rapalas and spoons, and it was perfect for that. And then I've also got the 700 Sierra Trout and Panfish for crappie, I think is my plan. I've never crappie fished, but I figured I'd buy a rod so if I force myself into crappie fishing. So
the one great thing about his rods is if you're doing a technique that requires a lot of sensitivity or a lot of bottom fishing, that's when it's really good to go to the higher end lines.
So is there a higher end rod you're using for that?
The Ecstasy is as good as it gets, and JJ probably has more, probably have used that more than anybody around here. You got one of the first ones.
Yeah, I think
So-
I think a 755 Ecstasy is probably it's the cream of the crop for flipping and pitching. 7654 is a little lighter if you're wanting to flip a 1/8 ounce or 3/16 ounce classic maybe, but 755 Ecstasy probably, if I was going to spend $500 on a rod, that would be the first one I would pick.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I got one of those.
Yeah, that's it.
So Matt had asked us before this video for me to give him the list of things we liked. So those 705, 734, 736. He's got most of those rods in a couple different series. I know he's got Champ, Sierra. I think he had a Colt,
Fury.
He stocked up on those for the outdoor show, which is awesome. But then additionally, if he doesn't have something you want, or you want to, you ran into JJ, Chuck, or I, and you saw a rod that caught your eye that Matt doesn't have sitting down there, he can order it for you. I think Chuck will tell you how that works.
Yeah, you just basically, if you have a rod that you want to get and he does not have it, just basically go into Matt and tell him you want to order this particular model. He will order it through Dobyns, and Dobyns will actually just drop ship it right to your house. So you don't have to, if you go in there and you're frustrated because you can't find a certain rod, which that does happen, usually if he gets that order to Dobyns usually will ship that rod out right away, and you probably have it in 3 or 4 day turnaround.
Yeah.
So like Matt,
it's a good
like
feature.
most retailers, you're not going to find all 100-something SKUs that Dobyns orders. So
Currently, right now, he does have a lot of the Champion XPs in stock, and I know he's got a lot of Furies coming, so he has a really good selection of just about everything right now.
Yeah. So do you guys have anything else you want to mention before I kind of talk about the sale stuff?
Yeah, I'd like to mention one thing. When you're spending $200, $300 or more on a rod, I would highly urge you to invest in rod protection. I use Rod Glove. Carries Rod Glove down there. It slides right over. The nice thing that I've learned is when you get a Dobyns rod, it usually comes with a tip protector on it, and I'll stuff that thing right up into the Rod Glove, which then will allow that to float. If in the event you have problems, all rods break, guys. I mean, you can break any rod, especially if you have a rod banging on your aluminum boat. It'll weaken it, and then the next time you set the hook on a 12-inch fish, it breaks, and you say, well, what's that? But Dobyns does have a lifetime warranty on manufacturer's defects. So if you think that you broke a rod and it's a defect, you can send that rod into Dobyns. They will inspect it and then send you a rod back, the same rod back, if they deemed it manufacturer's defect. If you're an idiot like me and you stick it up into the fan or close it in the car door, they have a no-hassle warranty replacement, which all you have to do is cut out the label section. So you cut this to here and here, and you send that label with the rod numbers on it to them. Each rod has a different value. I can't remember exactly the prices, but
it's pretty reasonable. You don't have to rebuy the rod.
Right. A champion, for example, is $70 plus shipping. So it's for under $100, you're going to get a brand new rod.
If you broke
it was your fault too,
right?
So
which is rare.
Works out good. Yeah.
That is a really, having used rods, I know Chuck's used a lot of different rods. I know JJ's been on the same deal, but having broken rods, this is a really favorable warranty policy for people who break stuff like myself and maybe JJ once in a while.
And I think it's a lifetime. Other than the Colt, I think the Colts is 1 year.
Yep.
But every other rod is lifetime. So if you have a 734 and you love it, and then you stick it down in a rock to get your lure out and break it, you send it in with $70 plus, I think it's 25 shipping. So for under $100, you get the same rod back for the life of it, and then that one would be warranted also. So it's a nice insurance policy, but like I said, get some rod gloves and put them on there just to protect them, and try to keep it from banging on stuff. If you have it laying up over your console and it's hitting that fiberglass while you're running down the lake, you're gonna get a weak spot. Or if you step on it, or you might not even notice it's broken until the next time you set the hook, and a lot of times that's what happens.
Yeah, most of your rod breakage is from a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah, and that's with every rod, with all rods, not just Dobyns, all of them. Most times you've done something to weaken it, and then you don't notice it break until game time.
Okay, well, that has been a very long-winded overview that we were all excited to provide on this episode of the different Dobyns things. As we start to get closer and closer to the fishing season, maybe take a look and see if there's an area where you could fit another rod, and I'm sure you could talk yourself into buying a rod. So,
or just really get on your phone and get on that Dobyns community. There's a lot of good information.
Tons.
On there, especially if you're wondering, man, what should I use this rod for? And there's a lot of examples on there what people use the rod for.
Yeah. So that kind of wraps up our episode. There is no Dobyns specific sale this week. We're going to actually roll that out for the outdoor show, which is the next episode coming out. So Matt is going to come up with a very generous discount at the outdoor show to potentially get yourself into a Dobyns rod. I don't know. JJ, Chuck, or I might be at the show talking rods. I'm not sure what our plan is for that, but make sure you mark in your calendar to come check out the outdoor show, check out K&K's booth, and pick up a Dobyns rod wherever you see one, and honestly just feel it. The balance is awesome. So
put a reel on it.
Put a reel on it and feel the balance.
If you come to the show, we'll have a reel there to put on there.
Yeah. And then we might have a giveaway roll here next as well. So thank you for tuning in. This has been another episode of Strategic Angling.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, Dobyns fans, Strategic Angling fans, Brady here again. Thank you for watching this lengthy video on all things Dobyns rods. Gary Dobyns has graciously decided to support our Strategic Angling episode here, and he's offering a giveaway, and it's pretty simple to enter. We're giving away Colt rod of your choice as long as it's in stock. I don't believe it's a swim bait rod. And then additionally, the winner, if you're not local to our area in the Midwest, Quad City area, the buyer would need to pay, or the winner of the giveaway would just pay the shipping cost to get you the rod. So how to enter. Option A, part one is subscribe to our Strategic Angling channel. Be a subscriber. If you're already a subscriber, amazing. You've done that, check. And then the other option to enter is to enter the emailing list we have in the description below. That way you can stay up to date on all things strategic angling and some of the promotions we're running with K&K, which may include a Dobyns sale. So if you would like to get notified of that, get on our emailing list, and we're gonna draw the winner the week of the outdoor show, which should be about 1 week after this episode airs. So yeah, get entered. Thank you again to Gary. We love the Dobyns rods. Somebody is gonna win a pretty sweet Colt rod, and I hope it's you. So get entered. Thank you for watching this video, and we'll catch you next week.